An abandoned German shepherd, gaunt, wounded, and desperate, sought shelter from a raging storm. What happens when such a fragile creature stumbles into the life of a man who has already lost everything? No one could have predicted the events that would unfold. This is not just another rescue story. It is a journey into how two deeply wounded souls can help each other heal in the most surprising and beautiful of ways. Prepare for a tale that will undoubtedly touch your heart, a reminder that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged when we need them most. The Colorado winter roared outside Eduardo Silva's remote mountain cabin. Temperatures had plummeted as the worst blizzard in decades blanketed the region in 3 feet of snow. Eduardo, a 38-year-old former search and rescue paramedic, had retreated to this cabin 6 months ago. A disastrous mountain rescue had left him with an irreparable leg injury and a burden of guilt that never left his side. On this night, with the wind howling through the pines, he sat by the fire, massaging his aching leg, a warm cup of coffee in hand, replaying the memories that tormented him. His days of saving lives were over, replaced by long hours of solitude and regret. In the dead of night, a faint sound at the back door cut through his thoughts. A scratch, almost imperceptible, muffled by the storm's fury, made Eduardo freeze and listen. Living 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, he knew visitors were a rarity, especially in a blizzard of this magnitude. The sound came again, this time accompanied by a whimper so faint it was nearly swallowed by the wind. Pushing past his apprehension, Eduardo grabbed his crutch and limped to the door, pulling it open just a crack. There, half buried in the snow drifting onto his porch, lay a German shepherd. The dog, once powerfully built, was now a gaunt shell, its fur matted and crusted with ice. A frayed piece of rope still tied around its neck told a story of cruel abandonment. "My God," Eduardo murmured. His paramedic instincts took over instantly as he assessed the scene. The dog was hypothermic, starving, and on the verge of death. Its eyes, a fading amber, met Eduardo's in a final desperate plea for help. Without hesitation, Eduardo gathered the frozen dog into his arms, his injured leg screaming in protest with every movement. The animal was surprisingly light for its size and offered no resistance, surrendering completely to the stranger's touch. Inside, Eduardo wrapped the dog in warm blankets and laid him near the hearth. The animal's breaths were shallow, its heartbeat faint and irregular. For the first time in months, Eduardo felt the old, familiar urgency, the race against time to save a fragile life. "Hang on," he whispered, gently massaging the dog's limbs to improve circulation. "I've got you now. Just hang on." As the snow piled higher outside and the wind moaned like a lament, Eduardo worked through the night to keep the dog alive. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. Exhausted but awake, Eduardo sat beside the German shepherd who, against all odds, had survived the night. The dog's condition, however, remained critical. He was severely dehydrated and malnourished, with frostbitten paws and what looked like an infected wound on his shoulder. "You need a vet," Eduardo murmured, checking the dog's weak pulse, knowing the snow would keep them trapped for at least 2 more days. As he carefully removed the cruel rope from the dog's neck, he revealed raw, irritated skin beneath. There was no collar, no tag, nothing to indicate where he had come from, or who had left him in this inhuman state. As Eduardo gently cleaned the wound, the dog's eyes flickered open, regarding him with hesitant confusion. "Easy now," Eduardo soothed. "I'm here to help." Despite the obvious pain, the dog didn't growl or flinch. He simply watched Eduardo's every move with an almost human intelligence. When offered a bowl of warm water, he drank slowly, then rested his head on Eduardo's hand in a gesture of weary trust. That simple touch, the first moment of affection Eduardo had allowed himself in months, shattered the walls he had built around his heart. Tears he hadn't shed since the accident began to fall freely. "I guess we're both pretty broken, aren't we?" he confessed softly to the dog, whose deep amber eyes seemed to say, "I understand. I am here now." Over the course of the day, Eduardo administered small amounts of diluted broth, applied antiseptic to the wounds, and even fashioned makeshift booties for the dog's frozen paws. The animal, as if sensing these painful interventions were for his own good, accepted every bit of care. As night fell, Eduardo made a comfortable bed by the fire, but the dog grew anxious whenever he moved away. After several attempts to leave him to rest, Eduardo finally settled on the floor beside him, his own injured leg stretched out awkwardly. "Just until you fall asleep," he promised. As darkness reclaimed the mountains, Eduardo found himself telling the dog his story, of the avalanche that had claimed 2 lives, of the nightmares that haunted him, of the surgeries and the medals now tucked away in a drawer, reminders only of his failure. "I was supposed to be the best," he confessed to his silent companion, "and I couldn't save them." The dog shifted closer, pressing its frail body against Eduardo's, offering a profound warmth. In that simple act lay a powerful message. Sometimes, being saved is just as important as saving others. For the first time in 6 long months, Eduardo slept without nightmares. 3 days passed before the mountain roads were cleared. In that time, the bond between Eduardo and the dog he now called Thor deepened in ways neither could have anticipated. Though still weak, Thor followed Eduardo everywhere, a quiet, watchful presence who seemed more concerned with his new master than with himself. "You're the one who needs looking after here," Eduardo joked one morning, as Thor limped loyally by his side. When pain forced Eduardo to sit and massage his leg, Thor's own strength was slowly returning, revealing a gentle, intelligent temperament, surprisingly attuned to the man's needs. Whenever Eduardo struggled with his crutch, Thor would appear, offering his own steady body for support. In the long, sleepless nights, just having Thor nearby made the darkness feel less absolute. Once he could get to town, Eduardo carefully loaded Thor into his truck for a visit to the Elk Creek Veterinary Clinic. Thor's anxiety about leaving the cabin was palpable, his eyes constantly seeking Eduardo for reassurance. "We'll be back," Eduardo promised, having already decided to keep Thor until he could learn his true story. At the clinic, Dr. Renata Santos, a veterinarian in her 40s with kind eyes and a practical demeanor, examined Thor thoroughly as Eduardo recounted their meeting. "He's severely malnourished and has an infected puncture wound," she confirmed, gently probing the dog's shoulder. "Judging by the rope marks and the state of his paw pads, it looks like he was tied up outside, broke free, and traveled a long way during the storm." Eduardo's voice grew thick with anger at the thought of someone abandoning this animal. Dr. Santos nodded gravely. "He's very lucky to be alive. Most animals in his condition wouldn't have survived that storm." Looking directly at Eduardo, she added, "In fact, you were both lucky that night. German shepherds are incredibly intelligent. When they choose to trust someone, it's not by accident." She smiled at Thor, who remained calm despite his discomfort. "This one chose well." After prescribing antibiotics, a special diet, and detailed care instructions, a thought occurred to Eduardo. Had Thor somehow sensed that he too needed saving? That evening, as Thor cautiously ate his first full meal, Eduardo called local shelters and the police to report the found dog. No one had filed a missing report for a German shepherd. One shelter worker commented bluntly that Thor was probably abandoned on purpose. People come up to these mountains to leave their problems behind, he'd said. Later, as a light snow began to fall again, Eduardo sat on his porch, watching the silent forest. Thor came and settled beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. The dog's presence made the vast wilderness feel less lonely, softening the edges of the crushing silence. "You know," Eduardo said, his voice low, "before you showed up, I was just waiting. Waiting for my days to end. Not really living, just existing." Thor rested his head on Eduardo's knee, as if to say, "I was just surviving, too." Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet routine of gradual healing solidified a bond they both desperately needed. Thor's transformation was remarkable. His coat regained its sheen, his body filled out, and he discovered a playful energy that suggested he was only 3 or 4 years old. The wound on his shoulder healed into a small, crescent-shaped scar. Eduardo was changing too. The responsibility of caring for Thor gave structure to his once aimless days. Morning walks, though slow and careful in the winter cold, became the highlight of his day. He even resumed the physical therapy exercises he had abandoned, with Thor as his attentive audience. "My leg will never be the same," Eduardo explained during one session, demonstrating his limited range of motion. "They said it was a career-ending injury." Thor tilted his head, then, with an uncanny intuition, placed a paw gently on Eduardo's scarred leg, as if to ask, "Show me where it hurts." A laugh, a real, unburdened laugh, burst from Eduardo's chest. "You're something else, you know that?" Though he'd posted notices about a found dog, Eduardo secretly hoped no one would ever claim Thor. The dog had become his anchor, a living reason to get up in the morning when grief threatened to pull him under. During a follow-up visit, Dr. Santos made a startling suggestion. "With your background in mountain rescue and Thor's intelligence, you could train him, maybe as a therapy dog or even for search and rescue." Eduardo's instinctive refusal was written all over his face, but she continued gently, "Sometimes the way forward doesn't look like the past, Eduardo. Sometimes it's better." The vet's words echoed in his mind, keeping him awake that night. On impulse, he pulled out an old search and rescue training manual he hadn't touched since the accident. Thor immediately settled beside him, sniffing the pages with keen interest. "You'd be good at this, wouldn't you?" Eduardo murmured, scratching behind Thor's ears. As if in reply, the dog placed his paw firmly on the open book and looked Eduardo in the eye, a clear message passing between them. "We can do this. Together." The idea began to take root, not as a return to what he had lost, but as a new chapter that honored his past and celebrated the unexpected blessing that had saved him. A few days later, a call came from a local shelter. A family had seen his flyer. They believed Thor was their missing dog and were coming the next day to identify him. Instead of offering closure, the news hit Eduardo like a punch to the gut. He stayed up all night, watching Thor sleep by the fire, trying to imagine the cabin without him. The thought was unbearable. The next morning, as a heavy snow fell, Eduardo and Thor waited on the porch, a quiet dread hanging between them. Sensing his owner's anguish, Thor pressed closer. "If they are your family," Eduardo whispered, each word an effort, "and if they were good to you, you should go home." But Thor only leaned harder against Eduardo's injured leg, the very leg he had helped strengthen on their walks, sending a clear message: "This is my home." Eduardo held his breath as a car made its way up the drive, not knowing whether to hope or to fear. A red SUV pulled to a stop, and a family of 4 got out, a couple in their 30s with 2 small children. Through it all, Thor remained motionless at Eduardo's side, showing no sign of recognition, no flicker of excitement. As the family approached, the dog's body tensed, and he shrank even closer to Eduardo. "Oh," the woman said immediately, her disappointment clear. "That's not our Rex. Our dog has white paws. This isn't him at all." A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over Eduardo, followed by a pang of guilt for feeling it. He offered the family some kind words, wishing them luck in their search, while Thor stood guard by his side. As they were leaving, the father paused and looked back. "You two," he said, a small smile on his face. "You seem to have a real bond. Maybe this was how it was always meant to happen." The words echoed long after the family had gone, suggesting that the meeting in the blizzard was not mere coincidence, but something predestined. 2 scarred souls finding exactly what they needed. With the question of Thor's true origin apparently settled, Eduardo decided to commit, heart and soul, to a future with the dog. He completed all the necessary paperwork to register Thor, scheduled his essential vaccinations, and began researching therapy dog training programs that could accommodate his own physical limitations. When spring finally arrived in the mountains, the melting snow revealed a renewed landscape one radiant April morning. Eduardo packed camping gear into his truck as Thor watched with undisguised excitement. This would be their first overnight trip, a modest test of Eduardo's strength and his injured leg, as well as a trial run for their training progress. "Nothing too ambitious," he assured Thor. "Just a night under the stars to see how we manage." They hiked 2 miles to a small lake. Eduardo's pace was steady, if not fast. His reliance on his cane had lessened since the winter, and Thor moved with the natural grace of a German shepherd, always circling back to check on him. At their lakeside camp, as he prepared a simple dinner, Eduardo reflected on the changes of the last 4 months. The crippling grief that had isolated him from the world had been replaced by a new sense of purpose. Though the pain in his leg remained, a ghost he might carry forever, it no longer defined him. The nightmares came less frequently, and when they did, Thor's steady presence anchored him to safety. "You know what's funny?" Eduardo said to Thor, as the sunset painted the mountains in gold and crimson. "Everyone thinks that on the night I found you, I was the one who saved you. But the truth is, you saved me, didn't you?" Thor's eyes, full of understanding, met his in a silence that said everything. The abandoned had become the rescuer. The broken could heal each other. Later, as stars emerged above their tent, Eduardo's phone pinged with an unexpected message, a rarity in this remote region. It was a brief text from Dr. Renata. The regional search and rescue team needed volunteers for a special training program, therapy dog support for survivors. "I immediately thought of you two," the message read. Intrigued, Eduardo looked at Thor, curled up beside him in the tent. He felt a certainty he hadn't known since before the avalanche. "What do you say, partner? Ready for a new challenge?" Thor's tail thumped firmly against the tent floor, an unmistakable answer. What had begun with a stray dog at his door in a fierce storm had turned into a new mission, a chance to be reborn, to find purpose, and to heal in the way one can only when they are exactly what another needs. Summer arrived, dressing the Colorado mountains in the vibrant colors of wildflowers, as Eduardo and Thor completed the final module of their therapy dog training. Both had transformed remarkably since that desperate winter night. Thor now radiated robust health and confidence, and Eduardo walked with a steadier gait, his limp a fading memory from months of determined rehabilitation. "You two are absolute naturals," praised Olivia, the training coordinator, as Thor flawlessly performed a simulation to comfort a distressed victim. The course had revealed what Eduardo already suspected. Thor possessed a rare sensitivity to human emotion, sensing distress before it was obvious, and offering comfort almost instinctively. This gift, combined with Eduardo's medical background and his own emotional scars, made them an exceptionally effective team in a crisis. Their first official call came sooner than expected. A family of hikers had gotten lost overnight on Thunder Mountain. While Eduardo and Thor weren't part of the active search, they were requested to support the family at the base camp, where the parents were frantic over their two missing teenage children. As Eduardo pulled his truck into the Trailhead Command Center, memories of his last rescue flooded his mind. His hands tightened on the wheel, his breath quickened. Instantly, Thor laid a comforting paw on Eduardo's arm, a silent, rehearsed signal for moments of anxiety. "I'm okay," Eduardo assured him, taking a deep, calming breath. Thor's steady gaze said everything. The past no longer had power over them. They lived in the now. Throughout that long day, as search teams scoured the mountain, Eduardo and Thor worked with the anxious family. Thor moved between them, a calming presence where it was needed most, while Eduardo offered updates and emotional support. Late in the day, when the radios crackled with the news that the teenagers had been found, cold and frightened but safe, Thor's demeanor suddenly shifted. He walked purposefully to the trail entrance, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his body alert but serene. "What is it, boy?" Eduardo asked, following his gaze. Minutes later, the search party emerged with the recovered teens. Thor had sensed their approach before anyone else. But what happened next was even more remarkable. Thor gently approached the 16-year-old girl, who was trembling and emotionally shaken, and laid down quietly beside her. The effect was immediate and profound. She knelt to hug him, burying her face in his fur, finding solace in his steadfast presence. "How did he know?" the girl's mother asked later, watching her daughter finally rest, with Thor standing guard. "He knows what it's like to be lost," Eduardo answered simply, "and to be found." Driving home that night under a canopy of stars, Eduardo realized something profound. He might never fully recover from the physical and emotional marks of that fateful rescue, but those very scars had made him the person who could connect with Thor and embrace this new purpose. His brokenness wasn't a sign of defeat. It was an essential part of his journey back to life. As Thor settled into his new orthopedic bed, Eduardo received an unexpected email from Dr. Renata. It was a news story about a police raid on a puppy mill in Wyoming, where several German shepherds had been rescued from horrific conditions. "I thought you'd want to see this," she wrote. One of the confiscated records showed that a male German shepherd matching Thor's description and age had been sold, then returned for being too gentle for guard dog training. The owner claimed the dog had escaped during transport about 5 months ago. The revelation explained so much. Eduardo looked at Thor, sleeping peacefully after such a meaningful day, and felt a surge of protective anger and deep gratitude. The cruel rejection that led to Thor's abandonment had, in a way, guided him to Eduardo's door on that decisive night. Too gentle, Eduardo whispered, thinking of the lives Thor had already touched with that very same gentleness. In that moment, he understood with absolute clarity. Sometimes our deepest wounds lead us to our greatest purpose, and what feels like abandonment can be the universe guiding us to where we truly belong. 1 year to the day that a starving German shepherd had collapsed on his porch, Eduardo stood in the same spot, watching Thor expertly demonstrate search techniques for a group of trainees. The cabin, like its inhabitants, had been transformed. It was now a training center for second-chance dogs, specializing in therapy and crisis support. The bond between handler and dog is everything, Eduardo explained to the group. It's built on trust, routine, and mutual respect. These animals aren't tools, they're partners. As if on cue, Thor finished his demonstration and returned to Eduardo's side, their syncopation seamless. Thor's once dull coat now gleamed in the autumn sun, his confident posture belying the trauma that had nearly taken his life. After the training session, Eduardo and Thor made their way to their favorite overlook, a rocky bluff with a view of a valley ablaze in autumn colors. It was their ritual to end the day here, watching the mountains shift from gold to purple as the sun went down. A year on, with his hand resting on Thor's head, Eduardo was moved by the depth of the change. His solitary existence had expanded to include regular work with regional emergency teams, weekend trainings, and a growing network of fellow handlers and first responders. His past as a mountain rescuer and his personal recovery had found new meaning in their shared work. What touched him most were the thank you letters and photos that now decorated a wall in the cabin, notes from people whose lives had been changed by Thor's quiet comfort. The dog had a rare gift for sensing who needed him most, offering his steady presence with a dignity and kindness that acknowledged human pain without being consumed by it. "You know what Dr. Renata told us yesterday?" Eduardo asked Thor, watching eagles ride the thermals above the valley. "She said we're wounded healers, that our own pain teaches us how to help others mend." Thor's amber eyes met his, filled with the same compassion that had transformed Eduardo's world. In that shared gaze was everything: the journey from devastation, the discovery of purpose, the daily choice to turn pain into service, and the profound bond that had saved them both. As dusk settled over the mountains, they walked back to the cabin together, Eduardo with only the slightest limp, Thor matching his every step. The lights inside glowed against the gathering dark, no longer a symbol of isolation, but a beacon of new beginnings. Inside, Eduardo paused before a framed photo that held a place of honor beside his certifications and awards. It showed Thor on his first day, gaunt, wounded, and wary, next to a recent picture of the dog in his therapy vest, strong and proud. Between the two images was a simple inscription: "Sometimes the most broken souls become the strongest healers." That night, as Thor settled into his usual spot at the foot of Eduardo's bed, a winter storm began to brew outside, much like the one that had brought them together. But this time, instead of heralding despair, the howling winds carried a message of hope. Sometimes, what looks like an ending is just the beginning of something extraordinary. The stray German shepherd who had appeared at the door in a storm had, in the end, forged two shattered lives into a whole, filled with a purpose and beauty that neither could have ever achieved alone. If this story has touched your heart, Remember that there are dogs like Thor still waiting for their second chance. Every act of kindness creates ripples that can change the world, just as one abandoned German shepherd forever changed the life of a man who had nearly given up on healing.